All right. Hello and welcome everyone to Future Proofing Sustainability Programs with JF Ahern, Apex, and Atrius. In this panel discussion, we speak to industry experts on how their businesses can take a comprehensive approach to sustainability reporting. All right. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Make sure you ask questions. Our team will be monitoring the chat that is available to the right of your screen, so feel free to drop questions there anytime. We've also saved time at the end to answer any questions as well. At the end of today's webinar, we will be sharing today's recording via email, so keep an eye out for that. And if you have additional questions after today's session, please reach out to marketing@atrius.com. All right, so in our panel today is myself moderating as product manager of Atrius, an Acuity Brands company. Peter Way, senior sustainability project manager with Apex Companies. Patrick Ritchie, building automation sales, construction and service with JF Ahern, and Ken Watson, director of enterprise accounts and certified energy manager with Acuity Brands as well. All right, next slide, please. Okay, let's get started here. So according to an Ernst & Young study, nearly half of all companies are still collecting data manually, and more than a third are using spreadsheets to measure their data. Why are spreadsheets not sustainable when it comes to building and maintaining sustainability programs? And how have you guys seen software and dashboards rise to meet that need?
Who wants to start? So go ahead, Ken. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll throw a couple of things out there. So we're all probably thinking the same things, but why are spreadsheets not sustainable? The big one I think is the time required. It's very manual, obviously, to capture data manually and store it in a spreadsheet or similar solution. And obviously, spreadsheets aren't all that great at allowing the user to kind of glean insights or look for ways to improve on whether it's energy management or sustainability reporting or whatever it might be. Patrick, Peter, you guys want to throw anything in there?
Yeah, I guess, I kind of wanted to just start out here kind of on the same line of thought from Ken is, we're able to baseline buildings, energy and carbon very quickly. Using, our partnership with Distech Controls and also Atrius. I mean, from start to finish, we can probably get a baseline from a building in a week. And, using spreadsheets and trying to get all the data from utility bills and, other systems and other people, that just wouldn't be possible. And, with, where things are going, the faster we can baseline these buildings, the more impact we can make. So that's kind of my thoughts on this one.
Yeah, coming at this from kind of the verifier perspective, the auditor perspective, I would say we see about half, and this is anecdotally, roughly half of our clients using spreadsheets, and the other half using platforms. And the big benefit, I would think, just from the auditor's perspective, is that there's a very clear audit trail for most platforms. Most platforms have that kind of the feature built into it, whereas on a spreadsheet, there's not an audit trail for verifiers to kind of follow along to understand who changed the data, who can change the data, when did they change the data, why did they change the data. It's very easy in a spreadsheet to accidentally press the delete button or link or break a link between spreadsheets that need to interact with each other. So, I'd certainly say that's kind of a big downside for it. But, to answer the question, why do so many companies still use spreadsheets? It's free with, their Microsoft, and you've probably already using Microsoft Excel to begin with. So I think it's probably just convenience, but more than anything else.
Great. And you guys touched a little bit about data ingestion, auditing the data. How have you seen software platforms and dashboards kind of help improve that process and take away some of those challenges that you've seen in spreadsheets?
Yeah, I'll throw a couple of things in there. So I think one of the things that we didn't entirely hit on in our previous answers is, or I guess we kind of did, Peter did, data quality is big. So being able to automate a flow of data, if a person isn't typing those numbers in, for example, your data quality is much more accurate. And then the other thing that I would say is, regularity of that data. So if someone's manually capturing data and putting it into a spreadsheet, you're relying on that person to enter it, whether it's a single person or many people have access to that spreadsheet. But again, to the extent that you can automate a flow of data, it's a little bit more regular. So that this platform that I might be using, for example, is my single source of truth, and all the data that is out there is in the platform today, and you're not waiting on people necessarily to manually upload it.
Yeah, and on a similar note to that, when a verifier is looking at this, when there's that manual entry, there is room for error, as you said. Whereas when it's automated, what we have to look at, it becomes a lot smaller, because all of a sudden we're looking to make sure, hey, is the API from your utility provider, for example, is that handoff happening automatically through an API as opposed to manual entry? If it's happening with manual entry, all of a sudden what we need to look at kind of expands. We need to go look at the actual underlying data, the source docs, in a way that we wouldn't otherwise have to do, or we don't otherwise have to do when a company's using automation just to pull that data directly from their utility provider.
Mm-hmm. And kind of the one thing I wanted to add to this, more from personal experience from using spreadsheets, and I guess turning that over to people who are going to take my role afterwards. There is a very large learning curve to take over an entire spreadsheet for carbon footprinting and energy management and all of that. And if there's standardization and automation in these dashboards, it's going to be much easier to scale, kind of scale a sustainability plan versus relying on an individual in a spreadsheet. And I think that's where a lot of the customers I'm dealing with right now, they're at, is they have a single person and they're trying to run around and figure out how to handle this. And if that person leaves or takes another job, you're kind of starting over. So
actually, Peter, you hit on something that I'd like to kind of expand on, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but would it be accurate to say that for a company like Apex that's doing verification, assurance, things like that, if data is being collected manually, and then how does that affect the labor and frankly the cost that a company like Apex would have to charge a customer if there's a lot of that manual data collection?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So it certainly does impact our pricing for our clients. The way that we do our pricing overwhelmingly for verifications is using a fixed fee approach. So when we're doing that, we're coming up with what we expect our labor to be, our labor costs to be, based on the estimated level of effort. And so if we know that there's a very centralized data collection, we know that there are tight controls on that data, we know that there's not a lot of either no or very little manual entry, then we know that for at least that portion of the inventory, verifying that portion of the inventory, we know that our costs are going to be lower. So, our efforts can be lower, and we, obviously reflect that in the price. And so that way we can be more competitive by bringing those prices down. And obviously the client's happy because, it brings their price down.
Right, great. We can move on to the next question. So you guys made a lot of really great points around the importance of data quality, accuracy, reliability, especially with all the pending regulations that we've seen, the SEC, the CSRD in Europe, along with just corporate standards and kind of expectations. Have you guys seen any, can you provide us some real life customer examples of how others are using their tools and solutions effectively, and kind of what some of the steps they're taking are to meet these needs?
Who wants to go first?
Patrick, Peter, one of you guys can.
I have Patrick. Oh, yeah, I'm going to defer to you first because I feel like you're going to have a better experience with this.
Yeah,
Or-
I mean,
or
I guess, I can kind of kick us off here and see where this goes. Is, one of the things working with our customers is, and partnering with Atrius and Distech is, how do we create a standardization, for where this data is going to flow? And, in particular, we are, we're working more on the building level energy and sustainability data. A lot of times we might be, kind of getting in there at ground zero and helping customers, design out these systems. Other times there might be existing systems in place. So really where we fit into this whole, ecosystem here, I guess, is, getting this data to a centralized, standardized, place to then be, put on a platform like Atrius, and then, ultimately, work with Peter and a firm like Apex to, make sure the data is all good and meeting the compliance needs. So
Yeah,
that's a good start here.
no, that's great. There's a phrase that somebody used with me probably a year ago by now that I really liked, which is investor grade data. And I think that kind of gets to the heart of, the pending regulations where, the greenhouse gas data, assuming that the regulations go in a similar state as they were drafted last March, these are going to become publicly disclosed figures, in 10Ks in annual reports. And with that, all of a sudden, the scrutiny that the data then gets is, really does need to be investor grade. So, when you have products or, platforms that are helping you make sure that your data is has that kind of, internal controls, I just see that as kind of an easy win, because all of a sudden, I try to imagine, doing your financial accounting entirely in spreadsheets. That's, it's a kind of it's unimaginable, right? So yeah, I really do see this as somewhat necessary, over the long run, is something that's going to end up being somewhat either, de facto necessary to really ensure that there is investor grade data.
Yeah, and I think both of you made really good points. There's both this huge learning curve. So if you're doing it internally in spreadsheets, you have to then become the expert that is assurance grade. Whereas if you move over to a software platform that already has those checks in place, that has the approved methodologies, you can get others from your organization involved, and you don't have to have that expert knowledge just in one person, because you can lean on that software. Great point. All right, let's move on to the next question. So we've talked about it. We all know that spreadsheets are manual, they're time consuming, they have data quality errors. Why are organizations still using them?
I could start on this one since I didn't really weigh in on the last one, but it's a tough one to answer, but I think number one, people are resistant to change. We all know that. And I think a lot of organizations don't realize that there is a better way. Again, you want to automate what you can. I'm obviously biased. I want people to come to Atrius to do that, but there are other things, there are other platforms out there that can do it, similarly, not quite as well. Yeah, you want to automate what you can so that you can free your finite time up for focusing on more important tasks or higher value tasks, and not capturing data off of utility bills and put into a spreadsheet, I guess. So, anything you guys want to add to that?
That higher value task, I completely understand. And like I was mentioning earlier, when we don't have that with our clients, we then have to go spend that time looking at their source documents, their utility bills. And yeah, I would certainly love my day to have a little less of that and a little bit more higher value add tasks. So at least on my front, I completely agree with that. But yeah, I very much understand that that's probably what's happening there, right? It's it's easy to kind of go with what you already have, right? So I can understand, it's like I said, you already do have spreadsheets just as a company, doing normal, course of business. So I understand how that happens, but yeah, there's certainly it takes a little time to, get something up and running, but then once you have it, you have it. And, even as, Chelsea said, you aren't then kind of containing everything to a very centralized, specialized knowledge. You have something that can kind of help you. And just as a verifier, I really do see this being helpful from the, once again, just auditability, right? I keep coming back to that, but that's also just where my mind is. How easy is it to get these, to get your figures, audited?
Yeah, and I think I just kind of want to, add another layer to this this conversation here is, I think going back to the first question, there's kind of a lack of maybe understanding of a different way to do things. We'll walk in with, maybe an existing customer that already has, a disk control system in place, and we hear that they have these sustainability goals. We kind of walk them through, how easy it is to expand on an existing system in place. And normally the immediate question is like, well, this is going to be very expensive, but a lot of the initial infrastructure is already in place for these customers to start pulling in, real-time energy meters, water meters, where they had to have someone walk around a plant physically and, get that data manually. So there's some level of, I don't have hard numbers, but some level of ROI when you're, talking about, automating this, these processes as well.
Great. And we actually got a question from the audience that I think fits in well with this question. I'm going to punt this to you, Ken. So the question is, as we talk about, manual calculations and spreadsheets, there are certain components of reporting that still are stuck in spreadsheets, it feels like today. And one of them is when you own, or when you only have access to leased portions of buildings and you don't have access to some of that scope 1 and 2 data, there's a lot of estimation that has to be done to calculate and fill those gaps for reporting. Can you think of ways that software can help solve this?
Yeah, so the Atrius Building Insights platform has, frankly, a new feature coming out in the next. I should ask you, Chelsea, but I think it's in the next month or so. To automate those calculations. So we have a lot of customers, particularly in kind of commercial real estate, that they're facing those same challenges. The utility bill is paid by the landlord or the owner of the building. It's included in their lease, so they just don't have transparency to it. So the way that we're kind of attacking that is pulling data from CBEX tables. Which is basically, because we know where the building is in the climate zone, we typically know the building use type and the square footage. Basically, the system will automatically pull the CBEX energy use intensity per square foot, and it'll multiply it by those factors to come with an estimate. So that's the way that we're doing it. Obviously, it's I would put that at the near the bottom in terms of that kind of hierarchy of we want actual data if we can get it, but if it can't be found and can't be captured, then that's the way that we're doing that going forward.
I am glad that you kind of mentioned, the kind of hierarchy of data, right? You do want actuals if you can get it. If not, you kind of want to use estimations, and then even within estimations, as you mentioned, there's still that kind of hierarchy. And I think that's a really good point about it's at some point, when you're in a multi-tenant space, you just kind of have to understand that you're not going to be using actuals, and you have to just kind of do the best you can. Does it make it not auditable or anything like that? No, we certainly do a lot of verifications where that with clients that have multi-tenant that are have spaces in multi-tenant buildings, and the norm is, they do their best to to come up with estimation methodologies, whether it's using kind of a very straightforward square footage emission factor, or if it's something a little bit more complicated, using maybe their own data to create their own emission factors, things like that. But yeah, no, there's I'm glad you kind of mentioned that hierarchy of data quality, because obviously what we're all looking for in terms of verifications, is accuracy and completeness.
All right, great. Let's move on to the next question. All right. And I know Patrick touched on this a little bit, but can you guys expand on kind of a reporting standardization? So there's all these different frameworks out now, all these requirements for sustainability programs to report. How can you find a solution that will help your foundation and help you continue to grow and support all these different frameworks?
Who's going to take this one to start with?
You can. How about you?
Yeah, let's give this one to Patrick.
Okay. All right. Hey, I'll take this one too. So, let me think about how I want to word this. I mean, we have some projects out there where, and I'm kind of, again, looking at it at the building level data, that may have, maybe there's 15 buildings that we're, looking at pulling energy data from, multiple different control systems, some proprietary, some not. What we look to do is create a standard on, first off, where we're going to get that data. So, some sort of supervisory system where we use ECNet, from Distech, which is the, Tritium N4 supervisor, and, essentially getting that data from all these different systems there. And then, using the Atrius platform to integrate from that point. Another, really key value proposition on why we like to use Atrius as the integration platform is that it's brand agnostic. So it's completely open. It doesn't care what control systems are, underneath it. There's different APIs, for integration to utility bills and other, kind of, different systems, and solar inverters and other ways to get data in. So, I mean, I think, for starters in this conversation is choose something open, have some flexibility, moving forward. An example that comes to mind is, I was working with a customer and they had, they were looking at a solution for energy, electrical metering, and that electrical metering package had a proprietary, cloud-based energy management software that wouldn't integrate to another system. And it just ended up being, the layers of integration became a mess. So finding a solution where all this can kind of come together cleanly.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. From our perspective, at Apex, we are platform agnostic when it comes to doing verifications. Like I said, half of our clients don't use a platform at all. But that benefit that I mentioned earlier, where a client that is using a platform, and we then therefore know that it's going to be a lighter lift from us, and therefore we can reduce our price for our clients. That really comes from the features of the platform, right? Ultimately, that's where that's stemming from. And what that really means, and kind of in very concrete terms, is can we as a verifier trust what's coming out of the platform? Do we trust that the emission factors are correct? Do we trust that that it's pulling in the data correctly? Do we trust, does the platform have that kind of audit trail feature? So, I think those are the things that we certainly have in mind. Obviously we're not selecting platforms for our clients, but those are certainly considerations that we have to consider when even when just, like I said, pricing something for a client, because if the platform that they're using has those features that make our job easier, then, like I said, we can pass those savings, those cost savings on to our clients.
Yep, and one thing I'll add to those too is, I always like to tell organizations to take the time and choose a platform that doesn't just meet your needs today, but what you think your needs will be in a few years. So some features that you might not need on day one, but you might need on year 2, year 3. Nobody likes to transition from one system to another. It can sometimes be painful, and it's one of those things where it's going to take some time. It doesn't matter what platform it is. We need an internal stakeholder and a champion in order to help drive a successful onboarding. So, you take the time, choose a platform that you can grow into. Most of the customers that I work with, it's kind of a crawl, walk, run type scenario. So the initial kind of phase 1 of onboarding might not be the entire organization. It might be a limited amount of data sets, things like that. But yeah, you want to make sure that you're making the right choice on the front end, and one that you can grow into.
Ken, is there a feature that, from on your platform that you see that clients sometimes overlook that first year, but then get more value out of that second and beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough.
And sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, I did it to you earlier, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's. If I had to pick one, I guess I would say we've got a pretty robust measurement and verification platform or app within the platform. So it's not entirely sustainability focused, but it's obviously related. So whenever a customer will do some sort of project or energy conservation measure on a building, this will allow them to automatically calculate the savings of cost, consumption, and emissions. So that's kind of more of a platform, or an app within the platform that most people don't use on day one, but as they get more comfortable with it, they start to use it a little bit more.
Very cool.
So I kind of want to just jump in here real quick and kind of go off what Ken was initially, speaking on. I have noticed, probably more over the last 6 months than before, the amount of energy dashboards that are being written into specs or added into specs on, new construction or retrofit projects. And once you start diving into that conversation, it can get pretty complicated. And a lot of times how these are being looked at is, per building. Like, we want a energy dashboard or sustainability dashboard at this building. And then you start building out this system of, maybe 10, 20, 40 buildings with all standalone, energy dashboards or sustainability dashboards at every building. And how does that get pulled into, an overall system or platform like Atrius? And, those are some of the conversations I've, been working through with some of our customers as well in the design phase. And I think it's something to think about is look at this more, holistically across, your portfolio of buildings that you're managing, and, somehow get your engineering team and, sustainability teams to kind of mesh on, what's our game plan? What's the game plan to, build out these control systems or energy management systems and actually be able to use this data kind of holistically, I guess.
All right. I think it's time to move on to Q&A. And let me just say that, Patrick, you have been a mind reader during this conversation. We got a question that came in, and you pretty much just started to answer, but I'll see if anyone else has anything to add. We got a question about how do you encourage your clients to share data both internally, so whether it's a sustainability manager working on reporting and an energy manager working on building level stuff, or I know there's a lot of discussion on getting data from suppliers when it comes to sustainability reporting. Is there any way that you guys recommend sharing that data upstream and downstream so that more people have access to the good data that we're collecting.
I can speak to it, I guess, a little bit. So, the question, Chelsea, was how do we encourage customers to share data to other stakeholders?
Yes.
Is that what it was? Yeah. So, again, this is really more Atreus focused for me, but the more people that are looking at the data, the more people that are relying on the data, the better, at least for us. The more value the customer gets. So we have some functions within our platform specifically that allow for sharing of dashboards, automated email, and then an occupant engagement kind of kiosk type scenario where you can install it in a lobby or embed it into a website. So yeah, I mean, lots of ways that we do that. And yeah, the more eyeballs on the data, the more successful a sustainability program tends to be.
Yeah, I mean, once again, coming from the perspective of doing the verification work and the assurance work on the data, as long as there are strong controls on the data, we're happy. I believe a lot of platforms do have the ability to kind of to toggle who can change what, who can input what. And so that's kind of important to us because we need to make sure that, that there are tight controls on the data, that there's no one can come in and accidentally override something. And, that's where that audit trail, comes in as well, just to make sure that there's no, that the data we are looking at, when we can take it as, when we normally should be able to take it at face value, that we indeed can. And that is, happens from tight data controls.
And I think just to maybe add to what I mentioned earlier too is I don't know if I've necessarily seen this happen yet, but I'm sure it does, is where you might have a one system doing one thing, and then they start, like an HVAC control system, and they start pulling energy in, and then maybe another part of the organization has more of a process control system, and they start pulling energy data into their platform in the same building. Having a strategy kind of from the top down on how these different, parts of your organization are going to work together, it's more complicated than, I think we would have had it figured out by now if this wasn't a complicated topic, but I see that that's going to be, a huge part of, building out these automated, sustainability platforms, I guess.
Thank you, guys. So it looks like we have a couple more questions, but I think we only have time for one more. So I'm going to end us with what I would consider a fun one. What are some of the biggest trends that you guys are seeing in sustainability right now? How are you helping your customers and end users, stay in the know with these trends, and how can you see kind of software as a helpful tool as we move forward onto the next?
This one I actually do want to jump to answer first, if I can.
Yeah.
For trends, I think there are two that I really see as kind of just the big changes for at least what I'm seeing. One is, I think, the pending regulation, in the US it really feels like it has kind of pushed a lot of companies to kind of go one level in sophistication above where they previously were. And what I mean by that is, once that draft was put out, by the SEC last March, we had quite a few companies that are longtime clients that came to us who had always been very much on the cutting edge of sustainability, of data collection, of data management, who kind of went from, hey, we've been doing limited verifications forever, to we want to get ahead of the pending regulation. And, keeping in mind that to go from limited to reasonable is a big jump for a lot of companies. So just let me take a step back and explain. Limited assurance is what most of our clients do, and that is kind of a lower level of data assurance. And then there's reasonable, which is a higher level. And so we actually saw quite a few companies that were already kind of on the cutting edge go from limited to wanting to do like essentially a dry run of reasonable assurance. And keeping in mind the SEC's draft rule from last year had a 2-year on-ramp for limited to reasonable. So that was very interesting to see. But then we also saw that same effect kind of go down the line. So companies that were, a little less mature kind of started moving up a little bit to the point where even this year, with still that rule being pending, and if it came into effect, most likely would come into effect, if in a year or a few years, we had quite a few clients come to us wanting to essentially use this year as kind of a dry run to see if they can get the timing of their verification done in line with their 10K. So, we kind of really saw everyone move up a level in sophistication. And the second trend I'm seeing, which is kind of the same thing, but you'll see how they kind of relate, is a lot of large companies are now requiring their suppliers to do greenhouse gas verifications or greenhouse gas inventories or verifications. And so where that has kind of done that same level of pushing companies forward, kind of like up a level of sophistication, we have seen actually quite a few companies that are, small to medium enterprises, just a handful of employees all the way to 50 employees, traditionally a space where not a lot of companies are doing their inventory, and especially not a lot of companies are doing verifications. All of a sudden, they're experiencing this pressure from what are presumably large clients of theirs who are now requiring them to do that kind of inventory and verification. So what's interesting there is, we're seeing that pressure not just come from regulators, but also from large corporations who are putting that kind of pressure onto their suppliers, even at the smallest, even for the smallest suppliers.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of just want to go right off of what Peter was talking about there. I mean, that's what I'm seeing as well. And a lot of the customers we're working with are, probably going to be in that category, maybe manufacturers that, recently a supplier said, hey, we want, carbon footprint for your, ton of aluminum or, EPD on your product or whatever it may be. And they kind of panic initially. And what's nice is that we're able to step in and, like I said, we can baseline a building, on their energy and carbon footprint very quickly, and offer a cost-effective solution instead of having to go out and, maybe try to figure out how to do this internally or hire someone, hire a consultant. We can automate this right off the bat. So I see that as well, is that there's a trickle down even before, or if any regulations do happen, it's trickling down to these smaller suppliers and companies out there.
I don't have much to add that you guys haven't said. I mean, my thought before Peter started talking about it was the same. The pending regulation, specifically not just the SEC, but different city and state benchmarking requirements. I just saw today that the Joint Commission is developing new requirements for carbon footprinting greenhouse gases within the healthcare vertical. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of happening all over. So it's kind of a sea change in terms of how we look at things through different organizations and verticals.
Yeah.
All right. Any final words? Thank you guys so much for participating. I think we're going to wrap that up, and I will make sure that any other questions that came to me in the chat get answered. And if there's any follow-up, please use the following: marketing@atrius.com, or visit us online. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Thank you.
Have a good day.